Hi, my name is Cassidy Clark, and today I'll be discussing Loving versus Virginia and the fight for interracial marriage rights. So, this is a landmark case that reshaped the legal and social landscape of interracial marriage in the United States. So, let's go back to the beginning and just talk about how it was viewed from the start. So, the first documented case was with Luisa de Abrego, a black free woman from Spain, and Miguel Rodriguez, a Spanish man from St. Augustine, Florida. And another well-known one is Pocahontas and John Rolfe. This was a political union for the Native American people and the English settlers. But by the late 1600s, laws began shifting towards racial control. So in 1691, the first law officially banning interracial marriage was passed in Maryland. These laws were designed to, maintain slavery, and reinforce that racial hierarchy. And these penalties were really harsh. They had fines, whippings, or forced servitude or slavery. Um, yeah, they were criminalized all over. And then in the 1860s, half of the states held formal bans. So next, we're going to talk about Jim Crow, and how the court helped reinforce these racial um, hierarchies. So the Jim Crow era spanned from the 1870s to the 1960s, roughly. So after Reconstruction, Southern states restored strict racial restrictions as a way to reinforce segregation. The legal system supported these laws. As we can see in Pace versus Alabama, the Supreme Court upheld criminal penalties for interracial relationships, which legitimized discrimination and made it really difficult for couples to challenge these bans. These couples were either arrested, jailed, or just told to leave their home state entirely. Um, this time it was not a it was not socially acceptable to be in an interracial relationship. So not only were you being, told by the government and, the laws that you couldn't be with the person that you love, but also like just out and about you would get these threats or hit or things like that just for being with who you love. So by the 1960s, 16 states still enforced these interracial marriage bans. So that brings us to the Lovings. This is Mildred here, and this is Richard Loving. They were a regular couple whose situation made them the center of a national constitutional challenge. So Mildred was Black and Native American, and Richard was white. They were legally married in Washington, D.C. They were residents of Virginia, however. So they were arrested when they returned to Virginia in the middle of the night, actually, and told that their marriage license from DC held no weight in Virginia. So they ended up going to jail or getting arrested rather, and then their judge said you either have a year in jail or you have to leave Virginia for 25 years. So they both chose to just leave and go and live in Washington, D.C. So after a while of living there, they were tired of like not being able to just live with who they love and live with their, their spouse in their home state, away from all their family. So the ACLU actually took their case, and they had argued that the law violated both the equal protection and due process clauses of the 14th Amendment. And in 1967, the Supreme Court sided with them and struck down interracial marriage bans. The court held that marriage is a fundamental right and cannot be restricted by racial classifications. Chief Justice Earl Warren said, "The freedom to marry or not to marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state." So that is a line that captures the core of the court's reasoning and spirit of the whole ruling. So that brings us to today, the impact and modern significance. The impact was immediate. They invalidated all bans essentially overnight. Um, Interracial marriages increased significantly after 1967, and the public approval changed dramatically from only 4% approvals in 1958 to around 94% today. Um, and it also set major precedent for later marriage equality cases, including Obergefell v. Hodges, um, and it that legalized same-sex marriages across the country. So, Ultimately, the Loving case reminds us that major constitutional change often begins with ordinary people standing up for their right to live freely. Richard and Mildred Loving were not activists. They just simply wanted to be married together in their own home state. Their courage reshaped American law and expanded the meaning of freedom for generations to come. Thank you. These are my references.